To the farmer on a cold autumn morning?
No.
Thanks for the warm hand. You didn't hear it here either. This is, uh-oh, now I'm getting...
Nope, it's okay, I got you.
You got it? All right, all right. Thank you all so much for being here. This is an amazing opportunity in community. I think some of you may be aware of that. You know, before we started this summit, Dr. Davis mentioned to me about community, and she's right, she's lived in this community her entire life. This community embraced me November 1st of 2000, and it's been an amazing experience. And many times over the years, people have asked me, why don't more people come together? Why don't you get acupuncturists and chiropractors and medical doctors together and really share your resources? And I can honestly say that the applause now needs to erupt in this building for YPOFs. This is really a monumental experience here in Cheyenne. This is truly an amazing experience, and I'm grateful to be invited to be a small part of that. We're going to get started here. Susan said I could share. How many of you ever heard any of my talks in the past? Just show of hands. Some of you. Oh, right. Wow, I thought I was more popular than that. Okay. All right, you know, good. Ego deflation, love that, right? That's good for the soul.
Keeps you humble.
Keeps you humble, thank you. So by way of just in a brief introduction, just for those of you who have never heard some of my background, in 1974, my grandfather had Parkinson's. He shook terribly bad in his right hand. And he was on Sinemint, which is a neurotoxic type drug for suppressing those symptoms, and he wasn't responding. And the problem with that drug has some nasty side effects. And the side effects are that the person can come out from under the influence very disoriented and aggressive. And so we were concerned, because he's 6'2", 240, and my grandmother's 5 foot nothing, that he might inadvertently harm her coming up from under the influence of this medication. And so what happened was, went on for about a year. They took him to the primary care physician. The physician said, hey, we got this new wonderful procedure, guaranteed you get it done, he'll stop shaking. So they said, well, great, let's do it. He's already shaking his head. So they slit the nerves in his wrist and he quit shaking. Approved procedure in 1974. So to put it lightly, my father became very upset. And he started becoming what's called a lay practitioner. He started learning some proprietary things that are out there in the universe and traditionally used for, they're non-invasive, non-toxic, things that he could do with herbs and foods and things of that nature. Now, it wasn't in vogue in 74, right? But from 1974 to 1998, for 24 years, he was a lay practitioner. He did not start a clinic. He had no interest in having a clinic. He was a building contractor. He built houses for a living, right? But this was his passion and his love born out of tragedy. As in most good things in life, that's what happens. And so in 1998, he started in a little town. How many of you have ever heard of Torrington? Torrington, Wyoming? Yeah, it's still there. He started on Radio Road in a little room about the size of maybe the eighth of a corner of that stage. And he had his little mortar and pestle, and he smelled like herbs, right? And he was talking to people and teaching them how to take better care of themselves naturally in a non-invasive way. And to keep it short, from 1998 till 2001, when I joined him, I was able to do a 2.5-year internship at his side, which is unheard of in our industry. I wish there was more of it. Mentoring needs to happen, and it needs to happen quickly to pass on the resources that we have and we're not even aware of. And since then, what's happened from a clinical perspective has, in my view, been nothing short of a miracle. Thank you, God. We see over 5,000 people a year that come for our little clinic here in Cheyenne from all over the country. We get to travel to different locations and help other practitioners implement the things that we have learned and discovered. And I've learned more from you than you've ever learned from me, I can assure you. And it's just been a real blessing. And so just to give you a frame of reference, this has been truly an amazing journey. And I'm looking forward to the next 20 years. One day at a time, but the next 20 years. And so I'm really excited about being a part of this summit. I thank you for being, Susan and YPOFs, for being asked to be here. You'll see on the screen it says, how did this happen? I think there's some things that we need to understand about our own history, and it's not talked about enough. The Flexner Report of 1910 transformed the nature and process of medical education in America, with a resulting elimination of proprietary, that's an interesting word, I'm going to explain that in a second, schools, and the establishment of the biomedical model as the gold standard of medical training. Well, when they say proprietary, you got to remember this back in 1902 when they started this process. 1910 is when the actual report was being formulated and conducted. And what happened is proprietary meant if you were a private school, if you had provided private education, if you were not relying on funding and endowments and lots of money to keep your doors open, okay? And it was, there's an old saying, tribal knowledge, okay? Tribal knowledge meaning that these things were passed down from generation to generation, that this is what we did if you had that condition, and it worked. And your health was restored, not masked with symptoms. So let's dive into this a little deeper. Who was Abraham Flexner? Has anybody here ever heard of the Flexner Report? Show of hands. Yeah, medical doctor for sure. Not many. About 92% of you have never heard of this. So let's get a little background on who Mr. Flexner was. Do I need to use this at all? Should I use that?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Just got to throw something at me. Flexner was born in Louisville, Kentucky, 1866, earned a BA in the classics. So pause, hold the phone. What is the classics?
Literature.
It's what?
Literature.
Literature. Like Greek mythology, maybe? Yeah. Egyptian mysticism, maybe? Some of that kind of stuff. He received that at Johns Hopkins University in 1886. Later, he was a member of the General Education Board. Now hold the phone again. You're going to hear me say hold the phone a lot. In fact, at some point, if you want to have some fun, you can join in and say hold the phone right along with me. What is the GEB? More on that in a minute. And a prominent proponent of educational reform in the United States. So I had to do a little digging to look this up, and you didn't have to go far. The General Education Board was a private organization. Okay. Which was used primarily to support higher education in medical schools in the United States and to help rural white and black schools in the South, as well as modernize farming practices. Well, now that's a whole other rabbit hole we could go down in terms of the soil quality and the chemicals and the fertilizers and pesticides and all the other things. We were sitting back there in the back, and Brenda says, we're already in World War III, and she's right. It's an erosive effect. It's an undermining experience that's taken place over hundreds and hundreds of years in this country. The board was created in 1902 by who? And guess what he did? In 1902, he donated $1 million. Don hit some numbers earlier that was pretty amazing to try and can't even fathom. But today, in our vernacular, $1 million doesn't really sound like a whole lot. I mean, most people have been kind of groomed and, kind of just muddled into, $1 million, that's not that much money. Well, in 1902, that's how much money $1 million is. $33,823,100. And guess what? They went on to give, there it is, $180 million to the GEB for funding to influence and take over an industry globally. Not just in America, globally. Now, Flexner's travels was only through the North America. Here's the importance and the impact on healthcare that it had. Flexner's commissioned objective to evaluate medical schools throughout North America. Primary outcome. The report was responsible for forcing, not encouraging, right? Not working with, not unifying, certainly not, as we mentioned earlier, having a sense of community around this issue. but forcing medical schools to develop curriculums and admission testing. We'll come back to that one in a second. Most influential result. The Flexner Report is responsible for sweeping changes. These changes and subsequent impact continue to this day. It's never went away. See, here's some interesting things about history. In 1895, D.D. Palmer brought us chiropractic. Heather's going to talk to you about, Dr. Heather's going to be speaking about that later. In 1905, Benedict Lust opened up naturopathic schools across the country. Those two schools and the outcome of those practitioners were having a much greater impact on society as a whole, with greater outcomes in health restoration than the biomedical, which is a fancy way of saying pharmaceutically driven model. And so what do when you don't want competition? You tear them all down or work on your own building. Well, their building was collapsing. And that's why they sought so much outside funding between the AMA and the GEB. Here's the consequences. Within 20 years after the report's publication, here's what happened to your original 155 medical schools in North America. They were reduced to 76, against Flexner's recommendation to drop it down to 31. That's a monopoly at its highest level. And oh, by the way, I mentioned earlier the GEB was formed in the South, and it was focusing on kind of restoring some equality between white and blacks in the schools and the farming. Flexner's report closed all but 2 predominantly black medical schools. Closed them all. So he was also unfortunately listed in the historical archives as being one of the most racist and sexist individuals on the planet, because the admissions policies of that report, and you can look it up, this is public knowledge, 364 pages. You can download it on your smartphones before I get off this stage to your phone. And I tell you, it's not a good read. It's not a fun read. But that is the result of what we have today in the modern disease management system. That unfortunately, professionals that are here today, whose hands are tied in some ways, thank God they're speaking out. Thank God they're here today. Here's the first page of it. Medical education in the United States and Canada, report to the people of North America. No, what does that say? Hold the phone. It's a report to the Carnegie Foundation for the advancement of teaching, not for the advancement of health, just the advancement of teaching. And Henry S. Pritchett is the current, at that time was the president of the foundation. Here's the man. Here's our man right there. I don't know what happened there, but here's our man. He looks kind of classical, don't he? Looks like he's got a classical education. He was not a scientist, nor was he a doctor. He was a commissioned, and I mean well-commissioned, educator by the Carnegie Foundation. After evaluating those schools, his objective obviously was to persuade them to implement the AMA gold standard. Non-compliance equated to the loss of accreditation funding, or both. So there you have it in a nutshell. You can dig deeper all you want, and those rabbit holes continue to go further and further and further. We have a system of disease management that has never found itself in its position it is today because of virtue or ethics, for sure, or getting people results with chronic illness. And I want to differentiate. Emergency medical, let me tell you something. If I wreck my motorcycle and I'm laying there bleeding, and I'm in pieces, you better get the best drugs and the best ambulance driver, right? And the best surgeon on the planet to come and rescue me. Or you can throw some cayenne pepper on me to stop the bleeding, but that'll probably make me get up and run. But when it comes to chronic illness, we're a miserable failure, ranked dead last in the world of all industrialized countries when it comes to chronic. And I'm thankful that you're here to get some real resources that'll help pull you out of that. We have a lot of work to do, as Don talked to. You mentioned it, right? We're way far behind the 8 ball on this stuff, and we need to really pay attention to our daily habits. Habits of physical, spiritual, and mental development must become a priority. I'll finish up with this. There's everybody that I work with has a to-do list, right? They have this, I'm going to get this done. Everyone's so busy, right? And I've started doing this little internal thing in the clinic, and I ask people about 20 or 25 times a day, You know, do you have a calendar or to-do list that you go by and that kind of keeps you on track, and you get your projects done? Oh yeah, everybody's got some form of it, whether it's a piece of paper or their iPhones or whatever. And the reality of it is that I look at them and say, well, what's at the top of your list? And they'll go into this stuff. Well, I got stuff with the kids, and I got this stuff at business, and I'm doing this project. And it's like, well, how come you're not on that list? And you all need to ask yourself that question. If you're not at the top of the list for your spiritual, physical, and mental health, then you don't have a whole lot to offer others. It becomes drudgery. It's stressful. It puts you in an early grave. I've seen it many, many times clinically over the years. So you make you number one. It's not called being selfish. It's called enlightened self-interest. And when you do that and take care of yourself that way, then you have more to offer. And all the other resources that these fine people that took time out of their day to be here to share with you are going to be meaningful, and you'll put them into practice. You're going to get exposed to hundreds of great ideas today, between now and 4 o'clock. Hundreds. And they're useless if you don't put in some effort and some patience and some time behind them to benefit from them. It's useless. So, thank you for being here, and thank you for letting me share, and I appreciate it. I look forward to speaking with all of you real soon.